Hi, ladies. I have read your Integrative Literature Review Part 1 and provided feedback on your ILR template. Excuse me. It is important that you go in sometime early this week and read that feedback and start thinking about how you're going to make those changes to Part 1 prior to starting Part 2. Part 1 is the blueprint. So Part 1 says, these are the things I'm going to do. This is the information I'm going to look for when I go into the databases and look for my literature. If Part 1 is not complete, if Part 1 has errors, then the blueprint you're going to follow isn't going to be predictable, and you're going to start on Part 2 and then have an incongruence. So before you start looking at your articles, before you start pulling things from the databases, go back in and read the feedback that was provided to you from Part 1 and make those changes. Unless I have specifically asked you to do this, you don't need to resubmit Part 1. Where it will come in to play is when you finalize your paper. So Part 1 is the blueprint, Part 2 is your matrix, and Part 3 is the roll-up of all of those pieces with a clear synthesis. So when I read your Part 3, it's going to have to clearly connect with a well-developed Part 1. So Part 1 has a clear blueprint, says you're going to do these steps in looking into the databases and gathering information to answer this specific PICO question. And then you're going to have an analysis of your findings. What did you find? What did you include? What did you exclude? And you're going to do that analysis, thematic analysis of what you found. If what you're writing about in Part 3 doesn't clearly connect with a corrected Part 1, then you're going to have a final paper that's inconsistent and doesn't make sense. So before you do your research, clean up Part 1. If you're reading the feedback from me in Part 1 and it's not making sense or you want to talk about it, I'm very happy to get on the phone and just chat with you and walk you through the feedback that's been provided. It is important that you understand Part 1 before you move forward. You guys are looking at some very interesting topics, and I'm really excited to be able to see kind of how this stuff unfolds. But know that it's complex. If you feel like this is tedious and this feels very detailed, that is an accurate perception. There is a reason this is one of the final things you're doing before you graduate. We know that it's hard, and we know that it's time consuming. So think about Part 1, clean that up sooner rather than later, and begin to start pulling your articles following the blueprint that you've developed in Part 1 over the next couple of days. You do not want to wait until the week that the Part 2 is due, your Integrative Literature Review Matrix. If you wait until that week, you're going to feel a little overwhelmed pulling 20 to 25 articles and then trying to put them in the matrix. Go ahead and start working through the literature now so that you can start pulling your articles. So what you're really doing in the week that it's due is putting things in your matrix and making those things make sense. So touch base with questions. Several things I want to point out just to remind you in case after you start reading several of these things start blending together. So make sure that in your excluded articles that you do not include gray literature. This would be unpublished theses, unpublished dissertations, opinions, commentaries, articles that are made by or that are recommendations, that these aren't actual research articles. So you need to be using evidence-based research articles in your analysis. The other group of literature that you're to exclude is level 1. When you look at your level of evidence table that's provided to you in the instructions, the gray material I was just talking about, that's level 7. So that's really the lowest form of evidence. Level 1, which is considered the best form of evidence, kind of the gold standard, are our published integrative literature reviews or systematic reviews that we find in the Cochrane database. the reason that they are excluded is they are not primary sourced material. So when you find a systematic review, it is an established review of other people's work. So it becomes a secondary reporting of the earlier findings of other authors. So for this review, you're going to exclude them and not include them in your 20 to 25 articles. They're not going to be included. So no gray literature, no level 1 systematic reviews, and so you're going to focus on level 2 to level 6 material. Okay, the other thing that I have noticed a trend in is the mixing of the use of the word since versus because. I'm not sure that this is something that's clear for you, so I just want to remind you that when you use the word since, you're talking about time. For an example, I have loved drinking hot tea since I was in college. That's a reference to time. If you take since out and you try to use because, it doesn't make any sense. When you think about because, you think about relationship between two things. So when you're writing, make sure that you're using the correct word to mean the correct thing, and know that there is a difference between because and since. The other thing to make sure in your revisions is to make sure that your PICO statement is clearly stated somewhere. You do not have to break it up with P, comma, I, comma. You don't have to do that. But you need to have it clearly stated so that I can look at it, so an objective reader can look at it and understand that you have a population, an intervention, a comparator, and an outcome. And your outcome needs to be clearly stated. And you should only have one outcome. I know a lot of the things you're looking at can have a variety of outcomes on your student population, but for this purpose, let's try to keep it clean and look at one outcome. So just make sure that you've done that. We're going to talk real briefly about what's due next week. You have your first practicum log. You guys are old hats at this. Make sure you're using prior feedback to guide your work in your first practicum log in this course. Before you start and enter practicum log number 1, please go into the Typhon time log and make sure that your duration column is a roll-up of all of your hours, so that when you are done with 620, that duration column reflects 200 hours. It could be more than 200, but at least 200 hours. So make sure that you've been properly entering your information into the time log correctly. It is okay if you've had your goals and objective column and you've further subdivided those into a goals and objective column, or maybe you've attended a conference and you've further subdivided that. That's fine, but just make sure your duration has a roll-up of all of your hours so that they're properly reflected. And then you can move on to your practicum log. Make sure that you're following the format that you've continued to use in prior courses. Again, I know that you've done this before, so I don't need to talk that to death. The other thing that's due is your portfolio part 2. Make sure that you've gone into portfolio part 1 and cleaned up all of the recommended changes, so you start off on the right foot. Developing part 2 will go a little easier. This time you're going to be doing your professional goals for your 1, 5, and 10. You're going to do clear goals, 1 or 2 goals, and then you're going to put steps in how you're going to accomplish those goals. Don't overdo it, folks. And many of you may not know, may not know where you're going to be in 10 years. Have a general idea of something that is reasonable to work towards. But again, it's a year 1, 5, and 10 goal. And make sure that under each goal, you have some clear steps that are going to help you be successful in achieving that goal. The other part of this is in your portfolio that's due is your professional development. Think about professional development as things that you could earn continuing education credit for. Things, courses, conferences, meetings, things that you've attended that have had scholarly, developmental, professional value. Do not get this commingled with the roles that you have been in or the things you have done for an organization. When we think about professional development, we're talking about formal development that is aligned with your professional growth. So be very clear-minded in that. If you know the dates are great. They help guide your reader to know how recent, how old things are in your own development. That is useful. Even if it's just the year you have, again, that's useful to have to guide your reader. I think that's all I have. I know you guys are probably anxiously looking forward to the Thanksgiving week Those of us that are in the online world, school keeps going whether we're having Thanksgiving or not, which I think can feel a little daunting, especially when your plate is pretty full. My prayer for you is that you take some time this week and you really anchor with your family, whomever that family is, whether it's just close friends or you have lots of little kids or all of your family's fur babies, whoever that is. Please take time this week to really enjoy those beloved people or puppies or cats. That's how we refill our well. That's how we get through hard things like graduate school. Is we have planned breaks that are meaningful to us, that refill our well and refill our spirit. It is so important that you do that. That everything else gets set on a back burner and you just get loved on and love on others. Safe travels if you are traveling, safe travels as you return. Know that if you have questions or concerns about your matrix, please touch base. I'm hosting Thanksgiving this year with my family, so I will be a little distracted midweek until the weekend, but that does not mean I will be off the radar. Just know that it may take me a little while longer to answer questions or provide feedback. But know that I'm here. I will look forward to hearing from you and reviewing your work from next week. Y'all take care. Happy Thanksgiving.